We begin most appropriately with the very first installment in the Sonic franchise. It laid the groundwork for what a Sonic game should be, and surprisingly, has quite a few moving parts to consider when adapting it for a story outline. The biggest task every writer must face when starting a story is establishing the status quo of not only the story, but the rest as well. Additionally, the first story has the task of setting up the most important characters, messages, plots, themes, and world-building elements for the story. While these can change over time, they can only change in relation to what has been established from the first word. The establishing cast of this story are Sonic and Eggman, who are the major characters in this story, the protagonist and the antagonist. The Flickies and Eggman's robots are their supporting cast. As every Sonic fan must know, world-building and Sonic seem to go together like rubber and glue. Thankfully, we're only starting off this series, so any contradictions that could happen haven't been given the chance to, yet. But that doesn't mean I can just forget about world-building. There are some very important things that I must talk about, as they don't just matter to this game's story outline, but the story outlines for the next games as well. The first question some of you may have about world building is something along the lines of, in Sonic the Hedgehog 1991, there are only 6 Chaos Emeralds. How will you deal with the fact that, generally going forward, there will be 7? And that is a good question. However, the exact details about the nature of the Chaos Emeralds are something I only wish to hint at for now, as there's quite a lot to explain in regards to the Chaos Emeralds if I had to explain it all right now, so I'll be saving those details for a later video. But I will explain that the Chaos Emeralds have unlimited energy. However, the output of that energy is bottlenecked. One Chaos Emerald only has enough power to sustain one of Eggman's robots at a time. But a strange phenomenon occurs when you bring the Chaos Emeralds together. The chaos energy they give off, when close together, doesn't become greater additionally, it becomes greater multiplicatively. Meaning that while one Chaos Emerald could only power one robot at a time, 2 Chaos Emeralds have enough power to power a score of robots. Now imagine what someone could do when even more Chaos Emeralds are brought together. While I believe it's never explicitly stated in the lore, I wish to introduce the idea that the reason why so many bizarre zones can exist on one small island isn't because these zones are naturally occurring, but rather the results of the chaotic energy warping the environment. This energy is why a small, quiet island can have such out-of-place areas like Spring Yard Zone, Starlight Zone, and Scrap Brain Zone, and yet also have places like Green Hill Zone, which is more of what you would expect from a small remote island. The energy from the Chaos Emeralds exuding from the special zone, or as I will refer to it, the realm of chaos, transforms any environment it touches, warping the land, sea and sky into all manner of shapes and ideas that the Chaos Emeralds want to express. Be it ancient architecture from a never-born civilization, or a forever far-off city in the distance that is impossibly built over the open ocean, the roads and lower floors of the buildings sunken beneath the waves. The most consistent effects of the chaotic energy are the impossible floating geometric shapes, loop-de-loops, and industrial civilization found throughout the island. At least those not created or twisted by Eggman to serve his purposes. But that's not all. To acquire a Chaos Emerald in this game, one must brave the special rings and their realm of chaos. While typically expressed as minigames throughout the franchise, I believe for an animated experience, these special rings should be expressions of unique challenges, not only for the characters in universe, but also for the animators. different art styles, drawing on different intervals, and perhaps crafting the story through a different medium altogether. For a character to obtain a Chaos Emerald, a difficult task must await them. The Chaos Emeralds must push their strengths, test their weaknesses, and most importantly, give the character a sense of bizarre wonderment that will hopefully be shared by the viewers of the Realm of Chaos. Another effect of the chaotic energy is the appearance of the collectible rings in Sonic's world. While most adaptations either treat rings as nothing more than a reference, such as Sonic Prime, or as he shows power-up gimmick, as seen in Sonic X, I believe a middle ground can be achieved, a way to interpret the rings in such a way that they function both how they do in the games, while also serving a purpose when defeating the bad guy. I propose that the rings should function similarly to how energy shielding works within the original Halo lore. In The Fall of Reach, fantastic book by the way, it makes Halo Combat Evolved even better. And in the first 3 Halo games, the energy shielding acts as a secondary health bar that can withstand great amounts of force and damage before it breaks. Additionally, in The Fall of Reach, momentum is carried through the 1mm thick energy shield. It is explained that the energy of a strike is redistributed and nullified by the energy shielding. This means getting hit by something large, hard, and fast will still hurt you, but you will survive. Whenever someone touches a ring, a slim, form-fitting ring appears on one of that person's digits, so most people can have up to a maximum of 10 rings. As seen in the games, the rings are normally quite large when found in the open world, but when touched, they teleport in a flash and appear already fitting around the collector's digit. When a person has a ring and then gets damaged, a ring can take a maximum amount of force before breaking. Any additional force is felt completely and utterly by the now ringless person. The amount of rings that shatter depends on the force that should be set to standard throughout every story in this outline. This should be done so that there are no inconsistencies or contrivances brought up to take the viewer out of the experience. As stated, upon taking damage, the rings will shatter, but they will also disappear. I believe having the rings scatter and remain, like in the games, would be narratively distracting and could take away from the viewing experience, rather than enhancing it. The last thing about rings is that sliding them off your digits should also cause them to shatter. I believe that's all I got to say about rings, meaning the only thing left to say about them is that I want your feedback. Did I miss a specific scenario regarding rings? Perhaps you've heard what I've said about rings and you have a better suggestion. Or perhaps you have or will have something to say later on about something else. If you do, please leave a comment down below, as I do read all the comments I get. And if I read an idea that works well for the story outline, I can add it in, even if I have already covered the game in a previous video. There are many themes explored throughout the Sonic games, but in this first entry, there is only one major theme present: nature versus technology. In Sonic the Hedgehog, this theme is explored via our main characters, Sonic versus Eggman, as well as our minor characters, the Flickies versus Eggman's robots. In fact, the argument could be made that the theme is actually nature versus Eggman. While that sounds a bit ridiculous at first, there's an even deeper theme that the Sonic games push, albeit most likely unconsciously, and I believe it better fits the Sonic franchise than good versus evil, especially for Sonic's character and his theme. It doesn't matter. To explain this theme, I must first exposit about a man named Michael Moorcock and his influence on the works of modern speculative fiction, and by extension, Ultimate Sonic, as there are many ideas within this story outline that can be traced back to him directly and his ideas. Michael Moorcock is an English writer, and to be honest, his stories are very infamous. Sometimes you'll read a story by Moorcock that could rival Tolkien. Other times, you're sad a tree was slain and desecrated with ink to tell this story. It's this lack of quality control that has made him fall into somewhat obscurity as of late, at least outside of writing circles. For writers, he is probably the third most influential modern speculative fiction writer, right behind Frank Herbert and J.R.R. Tolkien. This is because Michael Moorcock isn't famous for his stories, but rather the ideas found within. Many later successful creatives took and adapted, or sometimes ripped off, Moorcock's ideas for their own works. There are a multitude of these ideas that he popularized, such as the modern interpretations of magical items, with the Wheel of Time quite literally ripping off the Horn of Destiny with the Horn of Alir. Or how about the modern anti-hero tropes, which he codified in Elric of Melibene? Two worldwide known franchises practically stole major elements of Elric's character, with Geralt stealing Elric's look, and Arthas stealing his character arc, and even Stormbringer, Elric's magical soul-drinking sword. But the idea I wish to steal for Ultimate Sonic is arguably the one that Moorcock is most famous for, as it was a key inspiration for both Dungeons & Dragons and the Warhammer franchises. Law versus Chaos. Good versus evil is the most common scale used for morality in fiction, and while it is a perfectly valid scale for morality, I believe that for Ultimate Sonic, Law versus Chaos is more befitting for the stories Sonic Team wanted to tell than Good versus Evil, with my prime example being Sonic's theme song, It Doesn't Matter. As Law versus Chaos is about morality, it is a very in-depth subject, but for the sake of your sanity, I will give you enough details to get you started, but with promises that I will explain in greater detail the intricacies of Law versus Chaos down the line. But one thing to keep in mind is that what I'm about to go into is purely for the domain of speculative fiction, as explaining Law versus Chaos for real life is a whole other matter that I don't want to go into. The best place to start with Law versus Chaos is its greatest distinction from Good versus Evil. Good versus Evil is a personal morality, meaning it is hard to define as many centric and human factors come into play to determine whether an action or a thing is good or evil. Thankfully, a writer has complete control over every word they write, meaning that as long as they do a good job, a writer should be able to convince you that something is good or evil, or perhaps more complex with pieces from both sides of the scale, also known as moral complexity. But while Law versus Chaos can also have moral complexity, this complexity is a different kind than the kind found within Good versus Evil, as Law versus Chaos is not a personal morality, but rather a cosmic or universal one. This means that a person who is knowledgeable enough about an action or a thing can tell you whether something is definitively more lawful or chaotic leaning. However, whether or not something is lawful or chaotic does not tell us whether it is good or evil. An excellent example of Law versus Chaos is Dungeons & Dragons' alignment system prior to 4th edition, which you will notice is on its own scale and acts independently of Good versus Evil. A great example of how to use alignment would be the advanced Dungeons & Dragons setting, Planescape, as the entire setting is based around alignment. One key thing to note about Law versus Chaos is that it also follows the rules of yin and yang. Something cannot be wholly lawful or wholly chaotic. While something can go to the extremes, as long as it still exists, then it will always have a part of it that belongs to the other side. This is because everything has a natural amount of order to its being. Order is the balance of law and chaos. It is the innovation of tomorrow and the lessons learned of the past. What order is constantly changing, but the foundations remain the same. But ironically, despite law and chaos being diametrically opposed, if one were to fall completely to law or to chaos, they would end up in the same state, entropy, and then nothingness. Or for the sake of visual cohesion, disorder. Being too lawful leads to stagnation, and stagnation leads to disorder, while being too chaotic leads to entropy, and entropy leads to disorder. For the Sonic franchise, law versus chaos is brilliant, as the protagonist and antagonist both encapsulate this theme perfectly. Sonic in the games has always represented the chaotic side of nature. He is the fairy in the fairy tale, who appears to help those in need, or to save the day. Sonic goes where the wind blows, freely taking in the world and its wonders as he goes on his adventures, being taken by a spur-of-the-moment fancy as he plunges headfirst into the unknown and its dangers. For many stories in this outline, Sonic will come across a disturbing scene, and with his interest piqued, he will go out of his way to rectify the problem he sees. Eggman, on the other hand, is a perfect representation of law. Everything and anything must either be of Eggman or belong to Eggman. Eggman's robots are a mockery of nature's creation, a bold statement against Mother Nature herself that he is her better. Even Eggman's dream is one of the most lawful dreams I've ever heard of. Eggman desires to create his very own empire in the form of Eggman Land, not out of any territorial dispute, but because he wants to become the greatest being in all of history. And Eggman Land will be a giant amusement park to his greatness, to prove everyone that he is right. Sonic and Eggman could not be any more different, and it's that very difference that makes these two such compelling adversaries. Eggman takes his time to meticulously research and plan his next power grabs, while Sonic sees Eggman's evil schemes and immediately springs to action, not because he's a hero, but because that's what he wants to do. Sonic sees the suffering of others and their oppression, and he naturally wants to bring relief and freedom to them, while Eggman sees the freedom of others as a nuisance, as free will means there will be deviances from his grand plans, and therefore must be taken away in order for everything to fall into place. For this story outline, I believe my ultimate reason for using law versus chaos is Sonic's theme song from Adventure 1 and Adventure 2, It Doesn't Matter. This song's lyrics sound to me like they belong to an agent of chaos rather than an agent of good, as these words do not describe a hero. And if others believe him to be a hero, he's only a hero by circumstance. The last major theme that shall be carried through this franchise is friendship. Friendship is one of the core aspects of the Sonic franchise that cannot be ignored. Friendship can be found so prevalently that, for a time in the noughties, a vocal amount of derogatories referred to the Sonic characters as Sonic and his stupid friends. For this first game, the theme of friendship shall be shown through the connection between Sonic and the Flickies, and the antithesis through Eggman and his robots. The former are friends that choose to have connections with each other, while the latter are a master and his program machines that cannot disobey his commands. The message of a story is arguably the most important part, as it's the idea that you want your readers to come away with. The difference between a theme and a message is that a theme is for the writer, a connecting thread that will help weave the story together should the writer not know where to go or when he loses track of what he was writing about. But a message is for the reader. For this adaptation of Sonic the Hedgehog, the message should be that nature will triumph over destructive industrialization, as long as we are willing to give a helping hand. For both character and plot, I've decided to split up this script into multiple points of view. This means that I will tell you the plot of a game through the eyes of a character, as well as explain that character in their own sections. The points of view will only be done from the most important perspectives, usually meaning the main characters and the villains. When a new character is introduced, I will go into detail to explain what their purpose is in the story, as well as who and what I used as the inspirations for that character, before diving into the plot via their POV. This is because I found that understanding where a writer draws their inspiration from can help you understand what that writer seeks to accomplish with that character and their story. Of course, each Sonic character is first and foremost inspired by themselves, at least themselves from their first appearance in this timeline, as some characters, like Knuckles, have vastly different and contradictory representations in the games. I hope you will join me for the next issue, where I will be going over Sonic's inspirations, as well as a detailed explanation of his character.